If you've been watching my reel this week and listening to that song, you know I've been thinking about heroes. And, you know, I can't really realise why I've been thinking about heroes. Oh, other chocolates are available. But I've been thinking about heroes. And I would throw these chocolates out to you all to keep you busy while I'm preaching, but I'm from Yorkshire. And they're already spoken for these, so. Love me or hate me. Thank you. You know, I'm on the other side now. I'm in Will's place. And, you know, I can't believe it, but some people think that preachers preach for too long. You're all so you're all very quiet. I was hoping for no. Some people think that if you've got point 1a sub point 2 part 3 that you're going into too much depth in the scriptures. In fact, I heard a story once where a preacher was preaching and people started waving their watches in the air in the congregation. And he said, "Thank you for that offering, brother. Thank you for that offering, sister." Preachers preach the allotted time, and then they say, "and finally." Yes. And they don't mean it. No. And finally means, I've got 3 more points. Anyway, that's irrelevance, really. Heroes, heroes, heroes. Who is your hero and why? Who is your hero and why? You'll have one sentence, the name of your hero, and one sentence why. Steve. Who is your hero? Anyone got a hero?
I've only got one, and that's
Jesus. You're going to say Jesus.
I know, because I haven't got anybody else to aspire to.
I knew there'd be one, so spiritual. So spiritual.
And practical.
And practical. Anyone got a hero other than Jesus?
It's the character that Kevin Costner plays in Field of Dreams.
Field of Dreams.
Yeah.
The gender at the back there, Steve.
Corrie ten Boom.
Corrie ten Boom.
Yeah, that really. Yeah.
Why?
Because when she hid her family hid all those Jews and saved them,
yeah.
And they eventually got found out. But she was my heroine.
Amazing woman, yeah. Glenn down here.
Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King.
Because he had a dream and he lived it.
Yeah. Pandora.
Pandora? Well,
my dad.
Your dad?
Fantastic.
Rob Burrow, the rugby player. Rob Burrow, the rugby player who put it out there about motor neurone disease and started a foundation.
Yeah. Vulnerability. Win. And then Joe.
My husband is my hero.
Oh. Oh. Joe.
My brother Dan is my hero because he plays guitar and he's really cool.
Wow, amazing. Julie, did you have your hand up? No? Okay, right, let's stop there. That's lots of different heroes, lots of different reasons. If you're watching my reel I put on Instagram this week, you'd have seen a clue about one of my heroes. The music in the background was from a film made in 1964, I think. I might be wrong there. And it was called The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. That's right. And growing up as in a Yorkshire town in the 60s and 70s was not fun. I felt powerless and I couldn't change anything. School was tough. There's lots of bullies in my school, and my parents were hard working, but there wasn't a lot of money around. And I was looking for a hero. And I saw this film, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. I don't know if I should have been watching it, because I don't know what certificate it was. Did they have certificates in those days? I don't know. And there was this character in this film, and he was the man with no name. The man with no name, Clint Eastwood. And he was so cool, he used to ride into town with his poncho on and his hat, cigar out of his mouth, never lit the cigar, just chewed it. And when there was injustice in the town he arrived in, he would deal with it. And he had only one way of dealing with things, and that was his quick draw. And he dealt with the situation. Now, I'm not saying he was a good hero, and I'm not saying I was right to admire him. But as a young person who felt powerless, I saw hope in that situation. And you know, today is not so different to when Jesus was walking the earth. People then felt powerless. The Jewish people that Jesus was from were being oppressed by the Roman Empire, the power and the might of an empire that stretched thousands of miles. Life was hard, and they were looking for a hero. And then comes along this character, Jesus. He's a charismatic preacher. He talks about freedom. He's got a radical message to bring, and he works miracles. And he even sets people free from evil. The crowds love him. They begin to gather, but also some opposition as well. And I want to look at a passage this morning from Luke chapter 11, which shows us how Jesus responds to the crowd beginning to treat him like a hero. It's in Luke chapter 11, and I'm going to read it in sections. So firstly, from verses 29 to 32, it should be coming up on the screen. You don't have to read it with me, but you can if you want to. So verse 29 says this: When the crowds were increasing, he began to say, "This generation is an evil generation. It seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. For as Jonah became a sign to the people of Nineveh, so will the Son of Man be to this generation. The Queen of the South will rise up at the judgment with the men of this generation and condemn them. For she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here. The men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here." So the crowds are increasing. People are beginning to gather round Jesus in large numbers. And surely, you know, if you're Jesus, you've got to think this is good news, haven't you? Surely. It's got to be good news for him. He's becoming more popular. And therefore, because he's becoming more popular, he can have more influence on people. And he can win more people to his cause. He can fulfill his mission on earth. Now let's think about this crowd for a moment. This crowd that it describes here, this increasing crowd, would have consisted of all sorts of people. It would have consisted of the casual person who's just wandering by and thinks, what's happening here? It would have consisted of interested people who perhaps heard of who Jesus is and wanted to hear him and speak to him. It would have consisted of people who had heard the message and believed it and were starting to follow him. It would have consisted of true disciples who had really taken on board what Jesus was saying. And it might even have consisted of a few crazies as well. You know who they are? They're around today. I won't describe them. They're looking, it says, this crowd, for a sign. They're looking for a sign to confirm that Jesus is the real deal. Who do you identify with in the crowd? Who do you think identify with as I've mentioned some of those people? Are you just passing by, interested? Or do you follow or believe? Or are you a disciple? Jesus' mission was not to be a popular person. He's looking for genuine believers, for disciples. And so, as the crowd begins to swell and gather, he starts to make it difficult for them in what he says and the verses I've just read. Knowing their hearts, because Jesus knows the hearts of men and women, he sets them a riddle. You're looking for a sign, he says, but none will be given to you except the sign of Jonah. What's the sign of Jonah? Anyone? What's the sign of Jonah? Jean. Hands up straight away there, Jean.
The whale or the big fish.
The big fish or the whale. And what happened with the whale?
The whale swallowed Jonah up, and then Jonah went to the bottom of the sea in the whale.
And how long was he there for?
3 days.
3 days. The sign of Jonah, swallowed by a whale, as if dead for 3 days. The sign of Jonah. And so Jesus is setting this riddle, and what he's really pointing towards is his own death and resurrection in a riddle. Now, no one would probably have understood this until after the resurrection. And they'd have thought, oh, that guy, yeah, he was on the hill that day, and he said the bit of sign, the sign of Jonah, and he was crucified, and he was in the grave for 3 days. People saying he's risen. I wonder if that's what he meant. To explain it, he gives them a clue. The clue is Nineveh. As Jonah was preaching in Nineveh, after he had come out of the whale, the Ninevites heard the preaching and repented. They responded. And that's what Jesus is looking for from the crowd, a response. At the beginning of the Acts of the Apostles, in chapter 1, verse 15, we read that the disciples gathered in an upper room after the resurrection of Jesus. And it says in that verse, in all, that's all of them, there were about 120. That's not much of a crowd, is it? That's not much fruit for 3 years of upfront, in-your-face ministry. But for God, that 120 were a foundation of faith, which has grown year by year by year to what people estimate today as 2.4 billion people on this earth today. From 120 to 2.4 billion. And that's alive today. That's not counting all those who have come and gone and not been mentioned in that number. And so Jesus is quite hard on the crowd. Let's look at the next bit he says. In verses 33 to 36, he starts to give them a bit more information. He says, no one lighting a lamp puts it in a cellar or under a basket, but on a stand, so that those who enter may see the light. Your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. But when it is bad, your body is full of darkness. Therefore be careful lest the light in you be darkness. If then your whole body is full of light, having no part dark, it will be wholly bright, as when a lamp with its rays gives you light. What on earth is he talking about? What on earth is he saying? Well, having set this riddle, I think he's giving them a bit of an insight into understanding this riddle. As the sort of people he is looking for his disciples. He describes this picture of a light. And this light is not to be hidden away. It's to be displayed. It's to shine in the darkness. It's a sign of spiritual and moral health. And in it, Jesus is describing a correlation, a link, if you like, between what people are like on the inside and what they appear to be on the outside. In other words, what's inside them comes out. If you have darkness inside you, it comes out. If you have light inside you, it comes out. And so it's part of the sign. Part of the sign. Now Jesus, we know, did many, many signs. He didn't just give them the sign of Jonah. He did many signs and wonders while he was carrying out his 3 years of ministry. But what matters is not the sign. It's how we respond to the sign. Are we, today, 2025, counted among that 120, or do we walk away? I heard a story recently, and the story was of a father and a daughter. And the father was looking after the daughter because his wife was out of work, and he was working from home, so he was working as well. And he was looking after the daughter, and he suddenly realized in the middle of looking after his daughter and enjoying playing with her that he'd got a work call to take. And so he thought, what can I do? And the daughter was about 6 or 7 years old, and she couldn't just like go and read a book or something like that. She needed entertaining. And so he thought quickly, and he picked up a magazine, and he saw a picture in the magazine of a map of the world. And he thought, well, she's 7 years old. Her geography's not going to be that great. She's not going to know where all the countries are and where they go. Got an idea. So he tore out the picture of the map of the world from the magazine. And he tore it into pieces. And he said, I don't know what her name was. We'll call her Sally. I don't know. Not you, Sally, but another Sally. We'll call her Sally. And he said, Sally, I've got something for you to do. I've got to go just next door into this other room, and I'll be a little while. I want you to try and put this map of the world together. It's really hard, but I think you can do it, and I want you to try and put it back together again. And she said, great, Daddy, great, Daddy. And so he went, and he's getting on his phone call, and a couple of minutes later his daughter comes in and says, I've done it. He's like, what? You've done it? I've got this 20-minute phone call here. It's supposed to be taking a long time. It's supposed to be hard. And so he said, I can't believe it. Show me. And he went next door, and she'd stuck all the bits together with sellotape, because he'd given her a roll of sellotape. And the map of the world was perfect. Every country was in the right place. And he couldn't believe it. And so he said, Sally, how did you do that? You're 7 years old. How did you do that? And she said, well, it's like this, Daddy. When you tore the picture out of the book, out of the magazine, I noticed that on the other side of the picture was a picture of a man and a woman. And I thought, if I can put the man and the woman back together, I can put the world back together. And that's what Jesus came to do. He came to put people back together, and he came to put the world back together. That was Jesus' mission, to reconcile humanity to each other and to God. And the light that he describes here is a picture of what he's doing. Now, I've said about preachers not preaching too long. And so theoretically, we could stop there. We could, I'm thinking that if I stop preaching now, you could go home feeling pretty good. You could feel pretty good about yourselves and about coming to church because you've done what's required, you've sung the songs, you've done your offering, you've listened to the preacher, and he's not gone on too long. And, we're on the inside with disciples. But unfortunately, Jesus doesn't stop there. And so, much as I am reluctant this morning, I have got to go on. I've got to go on for a few minutes more. Because after these words about the light, in verses 37 and onwards, something very strange happens. Paul's laughing at me now. Excited. Because it says in verse 37, while Jesus was speaking, this is to the crowd, a Pharisee, in other words, a religious person, asked him to dine with him. He invites him to dinner. That's great, isn't it? I wish somebody would invite me to dinner. You know, I never get any invites to dinner. Oh, looking for sympathy. Oh. I'll continue. A Pharisee asked him to dine with him, so he went in and reclined at the table. The Pharisee, the religious person, if you like the churchgoer, was astonished to see that he did not first wash before dinner. So the custom was that when you went to someone's house, you washed your feet, washed the dust of the day off your feet. Yeah? And so Jesus says this to the Pharisee. Now this is harsh, this is. I've got to admit this is harsh. Now you Pharisees cleanse the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness. You fools! I don't know if he actually said it with this venomous tone, but I'm just acting, you know. Did not he who made the outside make the inside also? But give as alms those things that are within, and behold, everything is clean for you. But woe to you Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and every herb, and neglect justice and the love of God. Wow. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. Woe to you Pharisees, for you love the best seat in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplace. Woe to you, for you are like unmarked graves, and people walk over them without knowing it. Ouch. Ouch. See, that's why I wanted to stop at the previous verse. You had the opportunity to say, stop, stop, stop. You didn't say it. You know, there are some very hard things in these verses. And I want to say right at the beginning, I'm not saying that you are like the Pharisee. Please don't come up after this sermon and say, you condemned me this morning, you told me I was this and that and the other. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that for all of us, there are some warnings here. There are some lessons for all Christians here. And I think in our situation today, our political situation, our economic situation, the world situation, that there are some lessons here for us to learn as we live in that world. So what I want to start with in this passage is to tell you a little bit about the background of the Pharisees at that time of history. So we're talking about, obviously the time of Jesus, 33 AD, roughly. And at that time, the Jews, I've already said, were being oppressed by the Roman Empire. But that wasn't the first thing. For the previous 150 years, between the time of a guy called Antiochus Epiphanes, wow, what a name, and Herod the Great, who was ruling then, who was a puppet king doing the will of the Romans, the Jews had been subverted by Greek culture. And that had been exerting a pressure on the Jewish way of life. And when your culture is under pressure, you tend to fight to preserve your identity, don't you? You don't want to be changed by things around you from what you believe and build your life upon. And so for the Jews, the outworking of this was to maintain the separation between them and the cultures, particularly the Greek culture, around them. Because they did not want to be defiled by people of different moral, ethical, and intellectual, not to mention spiritual views. And what happened was that with the very best of intentions, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, started to develop strict rules and regulations about how people should live. They started to put in place little things like, we do it this way, not like those other people. This is what we think. This is how we interpret our scriptures. This is what we should do. And it became, over 150 years, more and more detailed. Two unfortunate things resulted from that rule-based culture that is developing among the Jewish people. First, the rules and regulations became rigid. And so, as that happened, the Jewish identity changed from being an internal relationship with God to being an outward display of religion. Not for everybody, but a lot of people. The second thing that happened was that the Pharisees, the leaders if you like, became more and more obsessed with small details of personal behavior. This is how you wash your hands. This is what you do when you come into my house. This is how you do that. This is how you do that. This is it. On and on and on. And in doing that, they neglected the bigger picture of the kingdom of God. And so they became very small-minded. Let me try and illustrate this for you with a picture. I want to describe to you a situation. I want to you to imagine a house or a flat with a window. And beyond this window is the most amazing view you can imagine. In fact, you don't have to imagine it. You just have to get Paul and Sue to invite you around for a cup of tea. And you can look out of their window because they've got this amazing view down in Senham. You'll be running off at the end this morning, Paul. Everybody was saying, can I come for a cup of tea? Can I come for a cup of tea? And so there's this window. It's a picture window. And it's got this amazing panoramic view. It might not be the sea, it might be something else. But it is the best view you have ever seen. Takes your breath away. And one day, you notice a little streak on the window. And so you get it and you polish it off. And then the next day, you notice that a seagull's pooed down the outside. And so you get on your ladder and you get to the window and you clean off the seagull poo. And the next day, something else happens. And the next day, something else happens. And the next day, something else happens. And then it rains. And so you decide to construct a scaffold on the outside so it's easier to access your window because it's quite hard getting up the ladder. And you decide to put some steps on the inside so you can get it. And you go to Jim's down Causeway Head and you get some buckets and some sponges and some squeezes. And you're looking at your window every day. You're looking at the glass to see what's happened. And that's what happened to the Pharisees. And that's what can happen to every one of us. We have this amazing picture window. But it's not the window that's important. It's the view. It's the view. And if the picture or the window becomes more important than the view, we lose sight of God. For us, Christians today, I think we're under pressure in society. Perhaps not the same pressures as the Jewish people were under. But I think we've lost Sunday. When I was young, I remember there was a campaign on the telly called Keep Sunday Special. Anyone remember that? A few older people. Sorry, Rachel, I didn't mean you were older. You're perhaps the same age as me. Keep Sunday Special. And I didn't understand what it was about at the time. I've got no interest, no thought or something whatsoever. But now I understand that people wanted to stop shops being open on Sunday, stop Sunday being just another ordinary day in life. Because there's something different about it. It's what we call a Sabbath, a day of rest, a day to worship God. And we've lost it. We've completely lost it in this country. Cancel culture is creeping in for talking about the Bible. There are some places now that you can't go and talk about the Bible, or you'll be cancelled. You'll be told you cannot speak, even on the streets of Britain. The right to life for the unborn, for the elderly, for the terminally ill is being eroded away. And maybe even marriage is being eroded away. I know many people now who just don't even think about getting married because they don't see it as relevant. But it's an ordinance of God. And then there's the pressure from social media to conform to an image of perfection. I don't quite fit that image, but it doesn't matter. And that's just a name, just a few general things. There are pressures in our society today which come upon us that rub up against where we are, where our foundations are. And it was the same for the Pharisees. And what did the Pharisees do? What was their mistake that Jesus highlights in these verses? Well, firstly, in the first couple of verses, he says that they clean the outside of the cup, they clean the dish, but the inside's full of greed and wickedness. They're not looking to the internal, they're looking to the external. Inside is unclean, outside is clean. And then he speaks about money. And he says they tithe, but they tithe without generosity. Where is their love? Where is their generosity? And then in verse 43 he says that they're putting themselves first. They're loving the best seats in the synagogue. They're loving the honor that people are giving them in the marketplace. It's all about them. And then in verse 44 he says the result of all these things. The result of all these things that these people who should be the on-fire people for God have become spiritually dead. People who contaminate other people. What? He says they're like graves, unmarked graves. What does that mean? Well, in those days, they used to mark out the positions of graves by putting whitewash on the ground so that people didn't accidentally walk over them and become defiled. Unmarked graves you can walk over because you don't know where they are. And in their culture, that would defile you. And Jesus says these Pharisees are like unmarked graves. So it's pretty tough on them, isn't he? It's pretty tough on them. And the next bit of the passage, we can stop here if you want. The next bit of the passage, he goes on to talk about lawyers. Lawyers. Now I'm going to actually stop there. I'm not going to go on to the next bit of the passage because I want this message to build you up, not depress you. And I guess that so far it's been pretty depressing because there's been a lot about what people shouldn't be like. You see, the heart of the problem is the problem with the heart. Both the crowd and the Pharisees were looking to the outside when they saw Jesus. One was looking for a sign, the other was looking to rules. But the majority of Jesus' work takes place on the inside. And his work leads us more into more than just a change of behavior, more than changing what we do. It leads to transformation. You see, I think I've got pretty good willpower. I think I can decide to do something and do it. So, if I was a person who swore a lot, I reckon with willpower I could stop swearing. I could decide to do that and not do it. Harley's shaking his head. I reckon if I was a person who drank too much, I reckon I could decide to stop drinking and do it. I reckon if I was a person who had a dodgy smoke, or maybe even a few pills, I might even be able to stop doing that. I don't know. Might even be able to do that. I reckon that if my attitude towards people was racist and homophobic, I might be able to become a bit more forgiving, a bit more rounded in my understanding. I reckon I could do that. But you know, that's not the point. That's not the point at all. Because these things that I've just mentioned, and lots of others as well, are the fruit of the human condition, not the root. The fruit, not the root. And changing them, me stopping swearing or drinking or being less controversial or less racist, will not change me inside. I'll still be the same person inside. It won't do me any good whatsoever. Might look better on the outside, might be more pleasant to be with, might have more friends, but it won't change me. Because we need to be put back together from the inside. And as that happens, some of these outward things will begin to change. And I've got good news for you. You don't have to stop smoking on day one of being a Christian. Now, none of you smoke, do you? Anybody smoke? No. So, okay. You don't have to stop vaping on day one of being a Christian. You don't have to stop those thought patterns in your mind that are not healthy on day one of being a Christian. God will work it through with you. The rules and the regulations that we sometimes put ourselves under are not what Jesus is about. In Jeremiah 17, verse 9, Jesus describes the condition of the human heart. And he says this, he says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? Heart disease. We all have it. We can take medicine. We can try and change things. But heart disease eventually leads to heart failure. We need a miracle. If you've got heart disease, you need a miracle. You need a miracle cure or a heart transplant. And that's exactly what God promises us in Ezekiel 36:26. He says this, and I will give you a new heart and a new spirit I will put within you, and I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. Now, I don't know about you, but I look back in my life and I realize I had a heart of stone. I wouldn't have thought so at the time. I'd have thought I was a good person. I was upright. I was relatively honest. I was relatively okay. I was relatively generous. I was relatively helpful. I was relatively all sorts of things. But I had a heart of stone. But when Christ came into my life, he began to change that heart of stone into a heart of flesh. And that's true for all of us. And what that leads to is holiness. And so, hence my title of this message, From Heroes to Holiness. We get to from heroes to holiness. Yes, a sign will be given, and has been given, the sign of Jonah, for the crowd. And there is a way to live as a disciple. But it's not about rules and regulations. This is not just about doing the right thing. It's about being the right person. And that's much more important. We can do the right things, but are we going to be the right person? Now, I don't know what comes into your mind when someone mentions the word holiness or holy. It conjures up all sorts of images and descriptions and things. And I was trying to get a grasp on this of sort of how to explain it to you. And at the moment in my devotions, I'm reading through Isaiah. And I'm reading it in the Message. And at the beginning of the Message, in each book of the Message, there's a description and an explanation of what the book is about. And at the beginning of the book of Isaiah, Eugene Peterson describes holiness as portrayed in Isaiah. And I thought it was good, and I thought it was worth sharing with you. This is what Eugene Peterson says about holiness in Isaiah. And it's perhaps not what you might think. If holy was ever pious or pastel tinted as a word in our vocabularies, the Isaiah preaching quickly turns it into something blazing. Holiness is the most attractive, the most intense experience we ever get. Sheer life. Authentic, first-hand living. Not life looked at and enjoyed from a distance. We find ourselves in on the operations of God himself, not talking about them or reading about them. Holiness is a furnace that transforms the men and women who enter into it. Holy, holy, holy. It's not needlepoint. It's the banner of revolution. The revolution. The Jesus revolution. I added that bit in the end. The Jesus revolution. And that's what Jesus is pointing to here, to the crowd, to the Pharisees, to the lawyers. That's where he wants them to go. And at the end of 3 years ministry, 120 people have got it, and the rest have scattered. The good news is, since then, 2.4 billion plus have got it. And I trust that we are numbered amongst them. I like listening to the radio, and I listened to a radio program this week about business. And it was interesting because this radio program was about business modes of operation. And they were discussing businesses that run, as they described it, on the edge of chaos. I thought, that's interesting. And what they meant by this was that these businesses have the minimum number of rules, they have very few policies, and no restrictions on the employees. Sounds great, doesn't it? And the reason they do that is because they want to allow creativity, they want to allow innovation, and they want to build success, which leads to growth. Now, this is an ideal model for small businesses and companies and startups with few employees, that are tight-knit relationships. People are bought into the company, there's ownership there. And even then, it's quite a risky strategy because you open yourself up to things going wrong. Yet, two of the companies that were represented on this program as following this model, this idea, were IKEA and Netflix. And each of them employing tens of thousands of people. And yet they follow this edge of chaos strategy. They employ people and leaders who say that in order for this approach to work, we trust you. For example, most companies, larger companies, have a travel policy. If you've got to go away on business, you can have economy flights. You've got to get there as soon as you can. You can stay in a hotel, but you can only spend this much per night on a hotel. You can have a per diem for food and stuff, and you can spend, I don't know, a few pounds per day on your food. These companies say, no. If you need to go on business, you choose how to go. You choose where you stay. You choose what you eat. And we trust you. Sounds good, doesn't it? Bit risky for the business, though. Profitability could go down. IKEA encourage people to fail in business. What they mean by that is that they want people to be working to the absolute limits of their ability, not to wear them out, but to stretch their creativity, to go beyond what they think they can do. And to encourage this, they have a thing called a banana certificate. It's a great thing, a banana certificate. And every employee gets a banana certificate when they join. And on this banana certificate, it's signed by the chief executive of IKEA, and it says on this thing, whatever mistake you've just made, I take responsibility for it. Signed, chief executive. In other words, you can make a whole mess, and it's not your fault. Now, it's quite a on-the-edge way of doing business. But you know, I think the church could learn a lot from that model. The church could learn a lot from that. I'm not saying that it's directly applicable. Don't get me wrong. But we believe in two concepts, don't we? They're called grace and mercy. And if we are to be a holy people, then we need these two things to be at the very center of our being. Not rules and policies and regulations, but relationships and grace and mercy. And so when Sunday messes up, you might have to say sorry. But it's okay. It's okay. If we don't do that, we'll just end up being another organisation. And I'm not just talking about Shekinah here, I'm talking about the church as a whole. We'll just end up being another organisation with lots of rules and regulations and not much life. Peter puts it like this in his letter. 1 Peter 1, 14 to 16. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. That's God speaking. And you know what? If we get that right, we can be the Good Samaritan that Simon talked about last Sunday. I haven't heard his message because I was in crash, but I'm told it was great. And that's where I want to be. Being that Good Samaritan. Not because I have to follow rules or regulations, not because someone tells me to do it, but because the heart of holiness and the relationships of grace and mercy are in you and in me.
That's interesting. Can I say something?
Yeah, of course you can, Harley. That's right, I'm finished now.
To be honest, it's very, very interesting. I'm quite touched about it. I'm saying that everybody has a completely different upbringing as a child.
Yeah.
Now, my upbringing, unfortunately, wasn't very nice. My biggest problem today, thank God that I'm in the church, thank God that I've seen God and He saved my life. I really do appreciate it. I do forgive, but I don't forget.
Right.
And the problem is, when anybody treats me bad,
Yeah.
I retaliate. I would just go very, very defensive because it's triggers in my brain the way I was brought up.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get out of that?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I've got a full answer.
That's what I struggle with.
Yeah.
And I lack on trust on people.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's their fault.
No.
It's my way of thinking.
Yeah.
It's because of my upbringing.
Yeah. I can relate to that because most of us have got long memories. Yeah? And it's really hard to get past that remembering.
I mean, I do forget,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The problem is I don't forget.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Well, let me say, forgiving is a big first step, because some people don't even get to that stage. So forgiving is the first big step. But the forgetting, I think, comes through time and transformation. So as Jesus works in us throughout our lives, transformation occurs. And there are things that happened in my life which have been pretty bad. And I'm not saying I've forgotten completely about them, but I'm not remembering them in a way which sparks the feelings that I had at the time. So it's not that I've forgotten them completely, but they don't trigger me, if you like. Yeah? So it's not literal forgetting, but it's forgetting what they caused, or the pain that they caused, and not responding to that pain. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
For me, that's for me. Joe?
I think there's something in that because it is difficult. You can feel forgiven, but it is difficult sometimes when the memories crop back. But I find when the memory comes back, I just give it immediately to God without going any deeper, and then it's gone. Give it to God, give it to God as soon as the memory comes in, because they do come in.
Yeah.
But that's just Satan trying to get you back on his side.
We can make choices on that, can't we? I once heard a preacher talking about this subject, and he was saying about how sometimes if something has happened to us, we can forgive that person who did that to us, but we can also nurse it, and we can it can become a focus for us. And he used a picture of like having a dog. Forgive me for this, Charlotte, if you're there. Like a dog, and you care for the dog, and you stroke the dog, and it becomes part of you, and you don't want to put the dog down, and you don't want to let go of the dog, because this feeling that you get from thinking about this thing that's happened, it actually reinforces who you are. And this guy said, "It's time to shoot Rover." And that, for the congregation, it was a real shock, you know. I'm glad Charlotte's not here. But you know what he meant. You know, we can't nurse these feelings. We can't nurse that hurt. We've got to face it and deal with it. And it takes time. And we can't, it's not that we forget it, but it's how we respond to it.
Yeah, I don't mean it. I mean, I do
No.
swear at people. I can get really, really defensive. But I don't mean it. It's because I'm protecting myself.
It's a self-defense mechanism.
Yeah, it's self-defense.
Yeah.
That's all it is. But that's my biggest problem. I find it very hard to deal with people. Even if they say the wrong words, it triggers me.
Yeah.
And I can be quite aggressive in a way, but I don't want to, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's just...
I'd like to get to a place where I don't have a self-defense mechanism.
Yeah.
I'm not there. I'm not there yet. And I don't know if I ever will be.
My brain is telling me that I'm no pushover. And I'm not going to let anybody push me over anymore because I've had enough.
Yeah.
If you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Okay, thanks,
I thought
Holly.
it was right to share it.
Anyone else got a question or wants to say anything? Linda?
It's not a question. It's I think we're a lot further behind in this country than places like America, where they have counselling and therapy. And I'm not saying that they're right at the right level, but the answer is that we don't have to sort it all out ourselves. There are Christian counsellors, there's Christian prayer ministry, there's Jesus. You know, we instead of trying to sort it out ourselves, like Joe said, we just invite Jesus into that sort of pain, that struggle, that there are options that's not just dependent on our own selves.
Great. Final one. I don't know. I'm looking. No, we've run out of time, I'm afraid. I've gone 2 minutes over. Oh, you've gone 2 minutes over. I'd stopped at 2 minutes ago. I'm innocent. I don't know if I can say that. Forgive me anyway. But let's pray, shall we? Father, thank you for this time. I hope it's been useful for people. And Lord has opened up some of our minds to think about what it is to go from looking for a hero to being holy. And that may build us up and encourage us in our faith. In Jesus' name, amen.